Okay, we're doing something a bit different. I don't do very many of these reaction videos, but I thought we should for this one, this topic, because it was so not on my radar until Harry brought it up here. This is Maggie Lake's YouTube channel, by the way. But I thought this was substantially important, and these videos or these interviews tend to be a little bit more high level, and they don't really hit a very broad audience like they should. So like this has 7,000 views. I mean, same goes for my content, right? But for people who watch my stuff, I want to make sure you guys don't miss some of this amazing commentary from Harry and perspectives here when it comes to the India-Pakistan conflict. So let's just go ahead and dive in, and then I'll provide some commentary as we go.
Long time. So you brought up something really interesting that you feel like is connected and sort of bears watching when it comes to what's happening in India and Pakistan. And I was commenting that like this happened, it's so big. I know there's headlines about it, but I feel like between the trade talks and the Pope, the new Pope, that it's like sort of there've been all these other headlines and maybe people not digging in on this. What are you watching and why is this on your radar?
So I speak to people in Asia who have expressed their concerns about where things were heading maybe 5-10 years ago even, but 5 years ago for sure. They manage money on behalf of Asian corporates. And their concern at this point is that we've set this up to give the Chinese authorities a strong incentive to challenge the US militarily in the region, to show that the US is not prepared to back its allies up, and to demonstrate to other entities, other states in the region, that perhaps you're better off making nice with China than you are relying on a US security guarantee. And in particular, they focus on the Philippines. The agreement the US has with the Philippines is flimsy. It was one that gives the US the option of intervening to assist the Philippines should they require help. Well, at any point, my understanding is the Chinese are playing a game which looks out 2 to 3 years. At some point, it may well be in their incentive, in their interests, to have some sort of military incident where the Philippines feels obliged to call on the Americans to assist them. And then the question you should ask yourself is, will the Americans choose to assist the Philippines in that circumstance? That's a long supply chain. They have assets in the region, they'll have bases in the region, but the supply chain isn't pleasant. And frankly, that's why I was so interested in the India-Pakistan event that just happened. We saw an air incident.
I want to pause on the idea that China's going to mess with the Philippines, because it is such a easier bridge for me to cross than to think that, China's just gonna up and one day invade Taiwan. That they would instead do something way more tactical like this, putting pressure on U.S. allies. And if we think about the macro environment in general, or even just let's take a few more steps back actually, and just recognize that like what I've been talking about honestly since COVID, that there would be more military encounters. If you go watch my videos back in COVID, before Russia invaded Ukraine, I was like, the world's way more dangerous. There should be way more wars popping up. And now we're entering another period of time where there should be a further acceleration due to the economic stress and restructuring that's occurring globally. So if we look at previous, large-scale wars, World War I, World War II, both were, and I hope I'm not catching too much into probably stuff that Harry's going to touch on, but both were preceded by economic turmoil and restructuring and the global power of the world starting to slip from their place of dominance and scrambling to keep a grasp on that. That's what led to World War I and World War II. Now there's obviously specific events that actually triggered them, but the stress that was building up for a single event to trigger the war was economic. And so we have this historical backdrop that doesn't need to completely mimic what we've seen historically, right? It just has to create a similar environment and similar tension, right? And then you have these strategic moves that might not lead to, full-blown, nuclear war, but could lead to like a Cuba situation, like a Cuban Missile Crisis type of situation during the Cold War, with China making a move on the Philippines, doing so to kind of stress test the U.S. and stress test their allies. And getting back to what I was saying earlier, it's a good time. I don't mean this as like morally positive, but strategically good time to do something like this when Trump has, and I'm just gonna say it, fumbled the ball horrifically. Okay, I try not to be political, but let's be honest, guys. I don't think there's any way to look at the way that Trump enacted these tariff policies and think that it was. Try not to be too harsh, but it just simply wasn't competent. We have instead of strategically targeting countries one by one, starting with allies, easy wins, easy win with Canada, easy win with Europe. Then maybe we go to Mexico. Then maybe we go to some of the smaller European countries, and then Japan, and then maybe you go to China and you start a tariff war with them. After you've built up leverage and allies, you got everyone on the same page. You don't do it all at once, because what has happened is we have driven a lot of Asian countries that previously did not get along with China whatsoever, driven them to have stronger agreements with the Chinese, because we went to battle with everyone all at the same time. And trade between Europe and China has even increased, because China took the opportunity to go to Europe and said, hey, you want some great deals? Maybe some of those trades you did with the U.S., maybe you could do it with us. Trying to shore up stuff that they couldn't get from the U.S. And people saying that, China will capitulate, they're going to be way worse off than the U.S. This is something that I've been covering in the Discord in our classes there. We have, the big narrative is China's going to have a economic collapse. Okay. And they're going to have to capitulate to tariffs. China has had multiple economic collapses, and they haven't had any Viva revolutions. Okay. They locked down their country for like 3 years during COVID. People were starving in their homes, and still this country did not capitulate. I mean, just think about that. And you think they're not going to handle this stress to try and win a war of attrition? An economic war of attrition with the U.S.? Yeah, right. And so what we've seen recently, post this interview happening, is instead of a deal, we got a full reset, which in my opinion is throwing in the towel, because Trump realizes that he's gravely misstepped, fumbled the ball horrifically, and so he's trying to just reset the table, maybe go back, work out agreements with the other countries that he should have done first instead of doing this all at once, and then come back to it. So the markets are kind of having this relief rally, but I think if we are really going to have the policy of being tough on China, I think you've got to revisit a lot of these agreements and restart this whole tariff war again, unless they're just going to completely give up. And it's wild to see these political partisans across the socials and even in the government kind of celebrate this as a win when you've literally accomplished nothing you set out to do when it comes to China at all. It's literally just a white flag, and I think they're walking away from this in a lot stronger position than they did before the tariffs. I don't think that's not a political statement. I think that it is just purely objectively better off than they were previously. They've had some economic damage. We have too, and it's not been fully realized even in markets. So anyways, let's go back to Harry, because I got derailed a little bit. Okay. Going back into what was most important between the India and Pakistan conflict.
Where India sent up something which is reported to be 72 jets. They were met by, I believe, something like 45, 46 Pakistani jets. And it's reported that 5 Indian jets were shot down. How did that happen? Well, what the reports say is that the Indian jets, the Pakistani jets, which are Chinese supplied but older, were armed with longer range Chinese missiles. And they also had a Swedish long range air reconnaissance aircraft. What they did was data link the missiles to the Swedish long-range reconnaissance thing. So these missiles have a 300-kilometer range, and it meant they could outrange the Indian jets massively. So as a result, they never had to use their own aircraft's radar, and therefore they remained completely invisible. They fired the missiles. The Indian jets who were using their radars, they were completely visible to the Pakistani jets, and they knocked down three Rafales and I think 2 Russian planes using those missiles. At no point was there any vulnerability for the Pakistani planes. And this completely changes the equation. Like, we don't have air-to-air missiles with that kind of range, to my knowledge. The Chinese, and these missiles we're talking about, we're talking about 2015. The tech is 2015. The Chinese probably have more. That EASA radar-based thing. So, does that change the balance of power in the region? I think it probably does. And we should, when I read Russian reports about how the geopol is going, the general sense I get from Russians, and the Russians here are probably FSB analysts, is that the Americans will back down on tariffs, and the Americans will back down militarily, and they don't want to conflict at this point. So let's see where this goes. But my sense is it may get hotter before it gets cooler, but it's never going to end up going to war because it would be a bad result.
So that is, in my opinion, huge, because China's looking at, basically the first encounter with our modern weaponry, and Western advanced weapons lost. Pakistan had a much smaller force, but since they had longer ranges on the missiles, they won the conflict. And I think this is a very important stepping stone to maybe future conflicts like the invasion of the Philippines that Harry spoke about. And I imagine that since these tensions don't really seem to be dying down, that we're going to see a few more conflicts like this. And if we start to see some weapon supplies, we're going to see some more. It sounds a bit insensitive to call them experiments, but a few more experiments with modern weaponry to see who's really more advanced. And, because you don't really get the real tests until the war breaks out of who really is technologically further ahead and is going to have the advantage. And then, it also sparks a complete advancement race. But in my opinion, that's really spooky. It's really important. It's probably more important than tariffs coming off, is understanding that these conflicts are over the horizon and they're coming in some way, shape, and form. So I think to say, oh, nothing's going to happen is pretty much a far gone idea. And now what we're looking for is the least damaging outcome.